his own word.
In this module, we're going to take a look at headers and the role they can play when it comes to working with data and also some security features to prevent different types of hacker attacks. So we're going to start off by talking about how we can add a paging header into our RESTful service so that the response that comes back can say the total number of customers available, even if only a handful of customers are retrieved by the client. That way we can start to build out some paging functionality, access the headers in our Angular service, and then build a component that can handle paging. And I'm going to show first off how we can add the paging support from a code standpoint. Then we'll talk about how we can add a custom paging component to allow the user to select which page of records they'd like to access. From there, we're going to talk about something that all RESTful services, and really any service that allows users to change data, should have in place. We're going to first talk about CSRF, cross-site request forgery, and explain what it is. And then I'm going to talk about how we can add in some functionality to block these types of attacks using a Node.js module called CSRF. From there, we're going to talk about how we can access a CSRF token in Angular and how Angular supports using CSRF tokens and working with them out of the box. I'll show how to get all of that going and how it works. So let's go ahead and get started by switching to our RESTful service and see how we can add some paging functionality.
कॉलेज में एडमिशन होगा कि नहीं जी? कैसे होगा? एग्जाम तो हुआ नहीं। आईएएस कॉलेज में 5 एडमिशन दे दो, लाखों तक कमा लो आराम से।
Currently, our application displays all of the customers as the user goes to the home page in Angular. And what we're going to do now is add some functionality into our RESTful service that will allow paging operations to occur. So we're going to make it so that a client, whether it's Angular or another client, could pass up the number of records to skip and the number of records to take, the top. Then what we'll do is use Mongoose to call MongoDB, do a paging operation there, and then return back those customers to the client. But we're also going to set a header that represents the total number of customers. So let's jump into the code, and I'll show you how we can do this on the RESTful service side. So we've already seen our get customers, and this method currently gets all of them. So we don't really have any paging operations at all going on here. We're just grabbing all of those particular records. Now what I'd like to do is change this and add a new route up top so that in addition to getting all the customers, we can actually get a set of paged customers. It's going to look like this. I'm going to come in and say router.get, and then we already have our API/customers, and I want it to be /page, and then we can pass in 2 route parameters. One is going to be how many records do we want to skip, and then how many records do we actually want to grab from the remaining. So we're going to come in and use the colon syntax very much like here, and we're going to first say :skip, :top. Now top is really the page size, but in SQL, a lot of SQL languages will have a top command to grab how many records you would like. So we're going to go ahead and pass that in, and then this will bind to a new function we're going to make, and then we'll do the bind to this again. Okay, so now we have a way to have a different route that's going to call this get customers page, and we need to make that. So we're going to do something similar to what you see up here, but now we're going to use a new customers repository function that I have available. So let's look at that first, and then we'll come back and make our get customers page function. So in our repository, I have a get paged customers, and notice it takes the number of records to skip, the number of records to grab, the page size, and then of course the callback. So what I'm going to do is first off get the total number of records, and we do some logging here. So we use a Mongoose function to call count. Once I have that, I'm then going to do the paged customers. And so we're going to call find. We don't find anything specific though. Grab all of them, but we're going to sort by last name. We're going to skip a certain number of records based on what's passed in, and then we're going to limit or page those records. Grab a page size. Now what I'll return to the callback is the total count, because we need that if we're going to do paging, especially on the Angular side, once we get into a pager component. We need the total number of records. And then we'll return the paged customers. That's what the customers will represent. So this is the Mongoose way of actually doing some paging operations. It's pretty easy to read, kind of reads like a sentence if you read from top to bottom. Well, now we can come on back and let's add our function down here for the get customers page. And it's going to be very similar to what you see above. We'll just use that different repository function. So we'll call this get customers page. And what we'll do in here is, first off, I'm going to do my standard logging, but we need to grab the route parameters, the skip, and the top. Now I already have some code for this to save a little typing, and we'll talk it through. So I'll do our standard logging just so we can see what's being called. And then what I'm going to do is go to the params and grab the top and the skip and just assign those. Now at this point, these aren't numeric, and they might not even have values. So what I'm going to do is say if the top or the skip is not a number, let's go ahead and give some defaults. We could certainly throw an error instead, but I'm going to try to be helpful to the caller. Otherwise, we're going to use a little JavaScript trick that we've seen earlier with a plus to convert a value into a numeric value. And so that'll convert these into numerics, and that's actually what Mongoose and MongoDB want as we do the paging operation. Now, the next thing we're going to do is use the customer's repo, and we're going to call now into our get paged customers. So let me go ahead and add this code, and this will be very similar to what we've seen before, but I'm going to show one new feature that we haven't seen. So we're going to call get page customers. We're going to pass in our skip and our top and our callback. Now, notice in the callback, which will get us our data, which has our count and our customers, I'm actually going to set a header representing the total number of customers. Now, I could certainly return that total number with the actual page customers here. Oftentimes, it can be cleaner to use headers in this scenario to pass back the total number of records, and that way the client really only has to worry about the page customers. If they want to get to the total, they can read from this header. Now, the header can be named anything you want. I always start my custom ones with X dash. That's a pretty common technique you'll see. But you could literally name it whatever you want. But in this case, Angular is now going to need to know about this header name, and you'll see that a little bit later. So we're going to pass in the data count, and that's how we can set a header on the response that's going to go back down to Angular from this RESTful service. Now, aside from that, it's really the same code that we did up with get customers. If we have an error, we're going to log it and return null. Otherwise, we're going to log and just return the raw customers. So different techniques can be used here, certainly, but with the header, we can kind of keep the total number of records out of the raw data. Instead, let the client choose if they want to get to that. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. And let's go now back into our console, make sure that everything looks good. Okay, I don't see any errors there. And now what I'm going to do is jump over to Postman, and we know that we can get all the customers. That's currently working, but let's see if we can just get one or two customers. So we need to go to our route. So I have /page, and then let's go to what you see right here that I have preloaded, page, and let's skip 0 and grab 2, or take the top 2. So let's send those, and there we go. So we get Michelle Avery, and there's the end of Michelle's orders, and then we get Ward Bell, and we're done. I'll have to scroll down to see, but notice we get 2. Now I could say skip 0 but grab 10. And now we'd have 10 records. You can see that we have quite a few more records now. This will allow us now to page our customers. So we have all this now going, and going back to the code then, you can see it's very, very easy to set headers with Node.js in our RESTful service so that any client can now get the total number of records. So now that we have this in place, we need a way to display those page records, and we'll start moving into that in the next few sections in this module. Now that the RESTful service is capable of paging customers and returning a header with the total number of customers available, we can switch our focus to our Angular service, call up to that RESTful endpoint, get those customers, and make them available to any components in the app that need them. So going back into our Angular data service, we already have the ability to get customers, and we've been using that throughout the course to display those customers on the home page of the app. What we're going to do now, though, is switch to paging the customers. So we're going to come on in and add a new function here, and we're going to call this function getCustomersPage. Now it's going to take the page that we're on, which would be the number 0, 1, 2, 3 type thing, and the page size, which is really our top. How many records do we want to grab? And then from here, we're going to call into the RESTful API. So we need to make a URL. Now, because I have a need to embed multiple variables into a string to compose the URL, I'm going to go ahead and use ES 2015 string template functionality here. So you're going to see that right now. So I'm going to say we want to make a GET request. But instead of using the normal quotes, apostrophes, or quotes like this, I'm going to use the tick, which is an ES 2015 feature. And we're going to embed the URL this way for the base URL. That'll be our API/customers. Then we can go ahead and just keep typing here and embed the page using the template syntax again. And we can embed the page size and get that going and available. So I didn't use that like down here because when it's a simple thing, I think it actually makes it harder to read. But in this case, it makes it nice because I don't have to put a lot of pluses and I don't have to get all that concatenation going and available. All right, so we'll have the base URL, which is our API/customers you'll see up top. We're going to concatenate that in with page, and then we'll grab the page variable, embed that, and the page size, and embed that. Now, because this is going to work with an async operation and observables, we need to do our map. We'll get back our response object. I'm also going to come in and do the standard catch that we've been doing the entire time. So we'll add our handle error. In the map, we need to do a little bit of custom things. First off, I'm going to grab the customers. We'll say let customers is response.json. So that's what we know we get back, either null or the customers. But what I'm going to do is above that, grab the total records. Now this means we need a way with Angular to get to that X inline count header that I mentioned. So we're going to say const total records, and this is going to be equal to, and I'm going to convert this into a numeric value, the response headers, and then we can call get to get into the headers. So this is pretty easy to do once you know how it works. We can say X inline count, and on the server side it was actually a little more uppercased in spots, but it really doesn't matter here. I could match that if I wanted or not. Now that's going to grab that header, convert it into a numeric value, and now we'll have the total records, and we also have the customers. Now with the customers, I need to tweak them a little bit, and that's why I'm doing the let. If you recall, earlier in the course, we called calculate customers order total, and that iterates through all the customers and basically adds their order totals up, grabs all the orders and totals them. So we're going to come in and do the same thing there. So we'll grab these customers like this, just paste that down, and that'll take care of that part. And now what I'm going to do is return not only the customers, but also the total records to any component that calls into this service. So we're going to put our return, and now I'm going to say results is the customers, but the total records is the total records that you see right here that we got from the header. So now we have a get customers page in our data service, and any component in the application can now call into this and use it. So that's how we can actually create the functionality to get the header, grab the customers, and then return those. So the next step would be to have a component call into this so that we can get these page records, and it of course is going to need to pass in the page and the page size for the number of records that we want to grab. Let's start to add some paging functionality into our component that's responsible for displaying the customers in the application. So the existing customers component, this is the one that is used for the home page of the app, already has the ability to store customers and filter customers. We talked about that earlier. But it also has two properties, total records and page size. And you'll see that we have some default values there. So what we need to do is our data service that we just looked at earlier is going to return the total records. We need to store that here. And then, of course, page size we're setting to 10, but that could certainly be dynamic as well if we wanted. But currently, the application isn't using paging. Instead, what it's doing is actually coming in and getting all the customers, and that's okay for now, but obviously we didn't go to the trouble of creating that on the server side to not use it, so we need to fix that. So what I'm going to do is come down below, and we have a get customers, and we could go ahead and leave that, but right above it, I'm going to add a get customers page, and this is going to take the page of customers we want to get. Page 1, page 2, page 3, whatever that may be. Now in here, we're going to add the code to call into the data service, and we're going to call that new get customers page that we saw. Now I'm going to pass in the page, but the page, as you're going to see later with the paging component, is going to be a 1 based. I'm going to subtract 1 off of that. So we're going to say page minus 1, and we're going to multiply that times the page size. And that's going to be the number of records to skip. And then we're also going to pass the page size, the number of records we want to grab. All right, now that we have that, we can come on in and subscribe to the observable. But what are we going to get back? Well, if we go back to our data service, currently get customers page actually doesn't really return anything useful there. It's kind of hard to know what we're going to get back. So what I've done is created an interface called iPageResults. And iPageResults is going to be responsible for allowing us to return page results of, and then we can pass iCustomer as an example into that. So let's come into our data service. I'm actually going to change this. We're going to say this returns an observable of iPageResults, which has a type of iCustomer for the actual value. Now, this currently isn't imported. So let's go ahead and come on up here. We'll add iPageResults there. Okay, so now I'm being very specific that get customers page returns an observable, but the observable type is an iPageResults, and the actual results are of type iCustomer. Now, by having this, I can return really any type of results now. It could be customers, it could be orders, it could be whatever we want. But this provides some nice consistency across the app, and it provides some nice IntelliSense or code help you're going to see as we, of course, type. So now that our data service is more explicit about what's being returned here, let's switch back to here. And now I can say that our response that we're going to get back from the subscription is going to be an iPageResults of iCustomer. And now that we have that, we can be a little more specific. Now, I'm going to say, actually, I just realized I need to make this an array, though, because we are going to get back an array. So instead of one customer, let's do an array there. Okay. So now that we have that, let's do our arrow function. And we'll go ahead in here, deal with our error if we had one. And I'm also going to add a kind of do always function, a do. And I'm also going to log some information about the paging just so we know that it was called. So we're just going to say get customers page, retrieve customers, and then we could pass in the page size and all that if we wanted as well, but we're going to go ahead and leave it as that. Okay, so now we have a way to call the get customers page. We pass in the page that was passed in here -1, so we get back to 0 based. Multiply that times the page size. That'll give us the skip value. And then the page size, which defaults to 10 in this example. We then subscribe to the observable, which we know we're going to get back this iPageResults of iCustomer array. And now when we get to the response, we can be very specific about the code help. I'll show you what I mean here. So I can say the customers and the filtered customers are both going to be set to response. And when I do dot here, you'll notice I get some nice code help because of the interface. So we'll do results. And I'm also going to need to update the total records for the paging we're going to be doing a little bit later so that we know how many pages to show of information. And we're going to grab the response and get the total records. And then we'll be done. So that'll update the properties for the customers and the filter customers. Now, we were doing that a little bit earlier if we come on down to this example with the get customers. But now we have that available. Now let me go ahead, since I added the other functions, and take that parenthesis out because we close it here. And now we're ready to go. So at this point, though, get customers is still being called when the ng on init gets called. So if we come back up to here, you'll notice we have get customers. Well, let's change that. Let's now call into, so we can try this out, our get customers page. And what I'm going to do is pass in a page of 1. Give me the first customers. And then, of course, I'm going to grab 10 of those. So instead of showing all the customers in the database, now when the component calls the data service, it'll tell it, I just want 10 records. And that then will kick in, load those customers, and we'll only display those 10. Now, we won't have the ability to page through other customers at this point, but we're going to fix that a little bit later in this module. So let's see where we're at so far. Let's first go back to the console, make sure we don't have any issues. Okay, the incremental compilation started. Looks like the TypeScript compiler worked okay there. Let's go back into the app now and refresh. Okay, now we should only have 10 customers here. All right, and you'll see that it ends much sooner. I'll let you count them. But that should be 10. And so we're working now. That's great. Everything else should still work the same. Nothing's changed on these. But now we have that part of the functionality in place, and the component is calling the data service, which then integrates with the RESTful service. But we don't have a way to get to multiple customers. We don't have page 2, page 3, and so on and so forth, so we need to fix that. That's what we're going to do next. The next thing we need to add into the component is the ability to actually click on a page and view those different customers. To do that, we're going to come back into our customers component, but what I want to do first is go into the template for it. Now, in the template, we need a way to not only display the grid of our customers as you see here, but we also need a way to page through those customers. Now, in the application, I already have some pagination functionality built in, a custom component. I'll talk about that in a moment. But let's go ahead and first use this pagination component and put it into play. So what I'm going to do is add this pagination. This is the name of the component selector. And then it has several properties and an event we can hook into. First off, anytime you do pagination, you need the total items. So we're going to bind to an input property that we'll look at called total items, and bind that to our total records that we saw back here.